Good morning, everyone. I call to order the December 2022 meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for those who made it in safely this morning with the snow, and then those who are joining us via the live stream. Let me first welcome our student representatives today. We have Gabriel Richardson in person, as well as Brandon Yang from the Rochester campus on Zoom. Good morning, Brandon. I hope you're both surviving finals or the preparation for it, so we wish you both the best of luck, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Our first agenda item is the external auditor report. For that, I will welcome our controller, Sue Paulson, joined with our team from Deloitte, Judy Dockendorf and Nicole Hoyam. Good to see you guys again.
Good morning.
Yeah, whenever you're ready, Controller Paulson, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chair Kenyanya and Regents. I'll turn it right over to Deloitte. They have a nice slide deck to share and some good information to share as well.
Good morning, Chair Kenyanya and members of the committee. I'm Judy Dockendorf, the Managing Director from Deloitte & Touche. I lead all of the services we provide to the university, and we'll talk to you today about the financial statement audit that was completed at the end of October, which is the first 80 so pages of your materials for the docket materials today. We'll summarize some of our procedures there and then just let you know of the remaining work that we're doing related to fiscal 2022. In the materials, we did issue an opinion on the consolidated financial statements for June 30th, 2022. That opinion is unqualified or a clean opinion, so the highest level of an opinion that can be given on the financial statements. That opinion also includes an emphasis of matter paragraph related to the adoption of the leasing standard. So in fiscal 2022, the university finally, it took a number of years for it to become applicable and a lot of work that was undertaken by the university, but that leasing standard was adopted. There's no impact to our opinion from that emphasis of matter, but really just drawing the attention to the reader of the financial statements that you do see changes there and that adoption was completed. Our opinion also includes a reference to the fact that the discretely presented component units, so the University of Minnesota Foundation and University of Minnesota Physicians, are actually audited by other auditors. The results of their financial statements are included, and we review those and we communicate with the other auditors, but we don't perform specific procedures on those balances. Additionally, we look at internal controls as an understanding of controls that are in place at the university, those around account reconciliations, segregation of duties, approvals, authorizations, review of financial statements, but we don't opine on internal controls. That's not part of the scope of our audit. We do understand them to drive our substantive procedures, but we do not opine on internal controls. So I'll turn it over to Nicole to talk through a few of the areas where we spent some more time during this year's audit.
Thank you, Judy. So consistent with our planning, communications, and past audits, across all organizations, there's a presumed risk of management override that they could perpetrate fraud by manipulating the financial statements. So this isn't unique to the university. It's a required auditing standard to consider this a presumed risk. So our procedures to address this include understanding management's controls over journal entries, account reconciliations, and the financial close and reporting process. We perform an analysis of journal entries to identify potential characteristics of audit interest and understand the business rationale for any underlying transactions. Overall, we also consider accounting estimates and whether there's indicators of potential bias, whether there's any favorability in those that is unwarranted. We also hold fraud inquiries with various members of accounting management, different Board of Regents members, as well as the president, to get an understanding of potential fraud risk throughout the organization and, any potential allegations of fraud.
And there were no instances of management override identified as the result of any of those procedures.
Thank you. So another required communication is regarding the university's significant accounting policies, and these are disclosed in the notes to the financial statements. Other than the adoption of the leasing standard, or GASB 87, which Judy discussed, there were no substantial changes to the significant accounting policies, and we also look at them to evaluate them for consistency and application as well. Other accounting estimates are things that management is using judgments in order to value for the financial statements. So our biggest accounting estimate is related to alternative investments, which I'll speak to a little bit later, but with respect to the GASB 87 implementation, our procedures involved understanding management's process to inventory the leases and their populations. So the university is both a lessee and a lessor for their leasing arrangements. We selected various contracts and evaluated whether they were a lease or not to assess the completeness of the lease population. We also made selections from both the lessee and lessor side to make sure that the amounts that were brought onto the statement of financial position were accurate based off of the contracts as well. We also looked back, because this was a retrospective application, to the 2021 financial statement impacts as well. And then with respect to accounting estimates, so previously the valuation of alternative investments has been called out as a significant risk. However, based off of our current risk assessment procedures, as well as additional firm guidance on what characteristics would lead it to be a significant risk, we actually downgraded that risk to just a higher risk. And that's based off of the consistency in the methodology for valuing these investments, as well as the investment managers and types of investments in the portfolio year over year. So as a result of this risk assessment, we still perform testing of controls over the investment process. We're still sending confirmations out to the investment managers and obtaining the underlying financial statements to help value those investments. So we're still sending about 100 confirmations overall for the investment portfolio and getting really good coverage here as well. And then a couple other required communications are with respect to uncorrected misstatements. So just a reminder that audits are to obtain reasonable rather than absolute assurance that the financial statements are free from a material misstatement that would impact the users of the financial statements decision. So we did not identify any uncorrected misstatements or past disclosures during our audit. And then one other thing to highlight is there is other information included in the university's annual financial report within the management discussion and analysis. This is not within the scope of audits. However, we do read the information for consistency with the disclosures and would make sure that there's nothing else that's called out there that indicates anything else in the financial statements is incorrect. And with that, I will hand it back to Judy for some of the other communications.
Thank you. So Appendix A here just has some additional required communications related to the 2022 financial statement audit. I wouldn't necessarily call out anything specific here, other than I would certainly thank Controller Paulson and her team for their help throughout the audit. We start the audit process back in the February timeframe, and it goes all the way through the end of October. That includes multiple meetings throughout the year as we're working through our planning procedures. We actually had a number of discussions for a number of years on the leasing standard and the approach management was taking, bringing in resources to answer questions. How are we thinking about certain assumptions we're using there? So quite the process. We've had open access to everyone we've needed to perform our procedures, and we actually were able to spend time on site in person, both during our interim time frame and our year-end time frame in the September and October timing with the accounting services team. So we certainly appreciate the help from everyone as we performed the 2022 financial statement audit. So that's done. We're still doing work related to 2022 for a number of other procedures that we've highlighted in Appendix B. And I'll maybe move forward. So 2 compliance-related audit and examinations. These are each done on an annual basis by Deloitte. The first being the federal compliance audit. So as you can see in the third bullet here, the university received approximately $1.2 billion in expenditures from a federal perspective that were completed in fiscal 2022. A lot of dollars here, big dollars both in research and development and student financial aid. So we look at those programs. Additionally, we've tested 5 other programs identified as major programs this year. That's a little higher than where we've normally been. We've probably been in a 4 to 5 program range, but really driven by some federal dollars received related to COVID grants. So there's a few new programs that we've looked at this year. We're continuing to complete our audit work here and hope to have that issued either here yet in December or early January. We also then perform an examination related to state financial aid that students receive. This is done under the Minnesota Office of Higher Education guidance. And here we'll issue 4 reports, a report for each campus, and we make a number of selections. It's probably close to 600 across all of the campuses of students where we make detailed selections and ensure that they were eligible for the state financial aid that they were receiving. We're just about wrapped up with that work as well, and we'll issue that likely in the January timeframe. And then additionally, we have some agreed upon procedure engagements that we do. So for the NCAA, on an annual basis, we look at Twin Cities and the revenues and expenditures there and perform procedures. These procedures are driven by the NCAA, and the requirement for them is laid out, and it's applicable for all Division I institutions. So we perform procedures by making selections of various revenue and expense transactions. We look at the debt and the capital assets specific to the athletics department, and then also understand activity with any affiliated booster clubs. On an every other year basis, we look at the regenerative medicine agreement with the Mayo Partnership. There's expenditures here that we'll look at for a 2-year period, make selections, and ensure that they're in accordance with the agreement with the Mayo Partnership. And then new this year, management has requested us to perform some agreed upon procedures related to retirement benefit plans. These plans themselves are not subject to an external audit, and so management from a governance perspective asked if we could perform some procedures to ensure that those plans are being operated in accordance with the plan agreements. So those are ongoing. So we will be back in February with you to give you the results of these remaining non-audit services that are ongoing for the university. That's the end of our prepared materials. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Committee members, any questions? Yep, Vice Chair Rocha.
Thank you, Chair Kenyanya. A couple questions, and I believe, am I pronouncing it right, Ms. Hoyam? Yes. You used a term, you said that you didn't find any, make sure I have the right words here because I got my pen out late, but you said there was no bias or favoritism that was unwarranted. Mm-hmm. When would it be warranted?
If it was substantiated by the transaction and it happened to be in a favorable direction, but it was based off of underlying data that supported that valuation.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was like, well, maybe there is some time where you say, well, this particular industry or this, gets a little more latitude or something. I was kind of curious. Mr. Chair, if I may again. So it's interesting because when you talk about you don't audit these other entities that are related, but when we talk about third-party entities, like for instance, part of our budget over time, I didn't dig up the last one, but we sometimes send money out, and sometimes we have money come in from third-party entities. Like, we provide budget to the Alumni Association. A couple $1 million a year, I believe, is typical. Do we ever audit to see what happens with that money, or once that money goes out, it's hands off as far as this board is concerned? Question one. Question two is, we also have, for instance, the foundation provides a budget to central administration, through the president's office. Do you audit how those funds are spent, or is it this, the president makes a decision about how that third-party entity's funds are spent, and they do the audit? We don't know what. As a board, we don't see an audit of those funds. So there's money going out to third-party entities. Do we know how that's spent, or is it the check and it's gone? And then decisions about funding of third-party entities. In this very unique case, it's the foundation. Do you do any auditing of those expenditures?
Stockendorf.
Yeah, Chair Kenyanya, Vice Chair Rocha, thank you for the question. We would primarily focus on if it went out seeing evidence that it went out, if there was an invoice for why it went out, the check payment going out, we're not going back to say, was it budgeted for X amount and it was spent for that amount? We're really just tracing the validity of the amounts going, not always the underlying reason and a budget perspective. Now, if we said we purchased an asset of this amount, we would go validate that that asset went there. But if it's something someone's invoicing you and you're sending a check, that's the support that we're looking at, not did they invoice you for the right budgeted amount. And I don't know if Controller Paulson wants to add maybe any more just on how.
Paulson?
Chair Kenyanya, Regent Rocha, both the Alumni Association and the University of Minnesota Foundation do have their own audits that are conducted, and we do get a copy of those audits and we do review them. At any point, we could ask specific questions as an institution trying to follow funds, back and forth at any point. Each entity does conduct their own audit, and Quinn can speak to what internal audits might do related to tracking specific transactions back and forth between the University of Minnesota Foundation, because that is a bit of a internal audit function from that perspective. But we do review the audits by our closely related entities, specifically UMP, UMF, the Alumni Association. We get those reports and review them.
Chief Auditor, before I let you go, I would imagine with the foundation, they're probably auditing us more so and inquiring about how their funds ended up. Is that the case?
Chair Kenyanya, auditing is probably not the
Inquiring.
exact right answer. Yeah, inquiring, and I know Quinn can speak to the agreed upon procedures that the University of Minnesota Foundation has with the University of Minnesota in kind of looking at and reviewing transactions.
Chief Auditor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Kenyanya. So briefly, excuse me. So briefly, we have a memorandum of understanding with the University of Minnesota Foundation that requires internal audit to do some monitoring of how those gift funds are being used. So every year we take a sample, we look at were those gift funds being used in accordance with donor intent, et cetera. So that's really the function in which we're doing to make sure on how that money is being spent and making sure it's properly accounted and pulled through. We also look at that in regular unit audits that we conduct. When we look at disbursements, if any gift money was used, was that used in accordance with donor intent? Did that meet all policy requirements, et cetera? Does that answer the question?
We are at time, but Mr. Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair Kenya. Yeah, it's, the world has changed, right? This is in the role of the foundation and the funding. It's, there was a time where it was just starting to build up. You go back to the 60s, it didn't really exist. And so there's a lot of intermingling now, which, particularly for folks early in their tenures on this board, what role does the board play in some of this decision-making, but just also making sure that it's being tracked in all of these different ways. I know we're out of time, Mr. Chair, but appreciate the opportunity.
Yep. Last question.
I can pass.
You can pass? All right. Thank you, Regent Swigum. I suppose I can pass mine too. I'll follow your lead, Regent Swigum. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work. And we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to seeing you in February.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Our next agenda item is the review of RFP process for external audit contract, which would make sense why our Deloitte team is leaving. I suppose they can't really participate in that conversation. But Director of Accounting Services, Molly Viola, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours again.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Kenyanya and committee members. This morning, I have the pleasure of discussing with you the planned RFP process for hiring the university's external auditor. The committee is responsible for recommending for board approval the engagement and the related fees of the university's external auditor, and the current contract will be expiring after the fiscal year 23 engagements. I'll begin with an overview of the services that are in scope for the RFP. If you'd like to refer to your document materials, they begin on page 112. There are 5 types of annually required engagements that will be in scope for this. This includes the audit of the university's consolidated financial statements, the audit of RMINCO, the audit of federal awards as required by OMB's uniform administrative requirements, the cost principles and audit requirements, The annual examination required by the Office of Higher Education of the financial aid programs, and the agreed upon procedures required for NCAA Division I and II member institutions, which would apply to the Twin Cities, Duluth, and Crookston campuses. In addition, potential services such as tax services or other audits or agreed upon procedures that are applicable to specific units will also be considered. This could include engagements such as FDA exams, employee benefit plan audits. Similar to the existing contract, the RFP is proposed for a period of up to 7 years. This would cover fiscal years 2024 through 2030. It would be structured as a 4-year contract with 3 one-year optional extensions. In regards to the process, the RFP is planned to be issued in early July of 23. Responses would be requested within 1 month. The responses would then be evaluated by a committee that will consist of representation from departments that have the most knowledge of the audit process, as well as those that have direct interaction with the auditors. This will include individuals from the Controller's Office, Internal Audit, Student Finance, Intercollegiate Athletics, and other university finance members. There will be various criteria that we set in the RFP. The criteria will consider things like staffing in regards to qualifications, as well as the continuity of the engagement team. We'll also want to consider their experience within the higher education industry, as well as the different types of engagements that are in scope. We'll also look into what kind of training opportunities would be available to university staff. This is something that can help us remain current on accounting and reporting requirements. With the shifts and flexibility available in a hybrid work environment, we'll also want to consider the approach to the execution of the engagements. We'll also look to the ability of their ability to present the audit work plan, and then consider the cost and the commitment to the university's supplier diversity goals. As the RFP process is formalized, we'll work with the committee for input as well as the ultimate approval of the final audit firm. Evaluations and interviews with the RFP committee will occur in August and September of 23. The board and university representatives would have an opportunity to meet with the final firm in October of 23 as well. And then we would be back here in December of 23 with management's recommendation to the Audit and Compliance Committee. And with that, I will open up for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Regent Sviggum.
How competitive is this? How many responses to our RFP will we get? Is this a competitive thing? Do we look mostly just at Minnesota firms? Any responses to the competitiveness of the process?
Director Viola.
I'm going to ask
Controller
Controller
Paulson,
Paulson to answer that.
Chair Kenyanya, Regent Sviggum. In looking at the prior RFP, we did only have 2 firms respond to the prior RFP, which was in 2017. Both of those finalists were interviewed by the university. What I can say in the debrief of that time period, there were really a couple of things that the committee talked about as being reasons for why we believe we only had 2 responses. The invite for the RFP went out to over 60 entities. Not all of those entities are audit and accounting firms, but there were probably about 30 that were what I could tell either based by name or recognition that they were audit and accounting type firms. A couple of the reasons that we talked about back in 2017 may be different than they are today, but in 2017, not all firms have a location in Minnesota. So firms would have to look at the proximity of their closest field office with respect to the experience and expertise that we're looking for as a university and Minneapolis, and factor in their travel costs, their travel time for their collective team to conduct the field work, participate in meetings, come to board meetings. So if they don't have a field office in Minneapolis, every time they need to come to campus, they're sending their entire team, twice a year to come to campus for 4 to 6 weeks during the field testing, and then a couple of times a year to come before the board office. So they're thinking about those costs that would have to be included as a part of their RFP or as a part of their proposal to determine whether they believe they'll be competitive or not in the Minneapolis market. The other thing that the last time we talked about, well, actually, let me talk about that. That might not be as big of a factor this time around, right? We all know prior to the pandemic, all the field work was done in person. We did it all in person. We did very little of it in person this time around. Actually, Judy commented that we met a few times in W-Bob over the time period of this audit. So the geographical consideration might not be as big of a consideration for the audit firms for this time, for this specific RFP. Because that cost to bring those teams to campus for 4 to 6 weeks at a time is a pretty big cost, and it would drive the, the overall price of their proposal up. The other consideration that we talked about the last time was the services. So the University of Minnesota is looking for that full scope of services, financial statements, the procedures around the uniform guidance, NCAA. So we're looking for a full scope of services. And there are some firms that when they look at themselves, they may or may not have that full scope of expertise. Or if they do, it might not be very close to Minneapolis. So then they're factoring that geographical consideration as well. And they maybe have certain aspects of expertise in Minneapolis, but then they'd have to bring the expertise related to maybe the uniform guidance up from Chicago for 4 to 6 weeks during that field testing. So that is also a consideration that might be different this time around because of the ability to do testing and a lot of the work remote that we didn't do last time. So we are hopeful that we get more responses than 2 this time around, that some of the reasons for only having 2 are different than they were before. In looking at kind of the Big Ten, we do a survey every couple of, every year, I would say, every year in January, usually we look at the Big Ten to see the firms that everybody has. And in most cases, most of the Big Ten have one of the 4 big auditing firms as their primary external auditor. There are some schools that are mandated by their state to use their state auditor for certain aspects of their auditing. And those typically then, those schools typically have a couple of audit firms. They'll have their state auditor, and then they may have a regional audit firm as well as a part of their portfolio of external auditors.
Just a
Regent
follow-up.
Swiggum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the response and the follow-up. I too was thinking it might be more competitive this time around with the advent of Zoom and whatever else we've done from technology. And I'm hoping it is, because when I read through the criteria, most of the criteria tends to be subjective rather than objective, at least in my mind. I see costs and the number of training sessions, that could be objective, but many of them are very subjective. So I think it's important that we get as much competitive applications to the RFP as possible, if in fact my assumption is right.
For Regent Rocha, are you done? Thank you, Regent Strong. For Regent Rocha goes, no, maybe he can go first, then I'll remember my question. Vice Chair Rocha. Yeah, I did.
Thank you, Chair Kenyanya. Well, and so, so I was part of the decision 5 years ago, and it was, I don't know if it's outside of standards or unusual, but to go with the same firm in consecutive contracts, that was, at the time, we were told it's unusual, because you typically, I don't remember if it's every contract or every so many years that you should always be changing out your auditor to make sure you get a fresh set of eyes on it. And so coming into this cycle, I don't know if you're looking for guidance on that point, but to the extent that we are aggressive in finding other applicants or ensuring that we have other proposals, I would like to get us back on the standard practice of having that rotation. I think Deloitte's done an amazing job, but I would also be much more comfortable if we can, say to the public that we are following that auditing practice of making sure that we're doing that rotation. I don't know if you need to speak to that, but I don't know if you're looking for guidance from this committee as to which direction I mean, I presume we could, we could simply vote to say we're going to get a different firm this time to make sure that we're back online with that, but whether that's necessary, I don't know. I'm interested in your perspective on that, Controller Paulson.
Controller Paulson.
Regent Kenyanya, Chair Rocha. I do anticipate it to be a competitive process. In my experience, I don't think there's a standard that expects you to rotate through. It can be something that this board chooses, that we can say our expectation is that at least a couple of times we do have a different audit firm. When I first started here, we had Deloitte, and then we had Clifton Larson Allen, I think, for 5 years. And the last 2 cycles, it has been Deloitte that has won the RFP. I don't necessarily stand firm I'm not certain about the expectation as a best practice that you have to rotate auditors. The audit firms are bound by their professional obligation to remain independent. And I know that Deloitte is a worldwide entity that wants to protect their entity and will always do what they believe is right when it comes to auditing the University of Minnesota. So I don't think there's any question about having the right eyes or anything on anything that we do here. There's lots and lots of conversations that we do through every single engagement with Deloitte. Nothing is a simple handing back and forth. So there's lots of conversations, lots of testing, and Deloitte does have different people doing field work. The consistent partner here, absolutely, Judy's been a part of the engagement for quite a while, but the team that is actually doing the detailed testing is often different people cycling through. So it is different eyes within the firm from that perspective. But back to your point about competitiveness, I do believe it'll be a better pool this time around, simply related to the fact that the industry and us as an institute of higher education, we all do things different than we did last time. So firms might be more interested in putting in a proposal because they don't have to think about all those travel costs and travel time, and their proposals can be more competitive when it comes to cost.
Briefly.
I appreciate the comments. But we were very specifically asked to, make an exception to the standard of changing firms 5 years ago. I remember that quite clearly, but I do appreciate your commentary. I just know for me, it's, to do it once is one thing, and then the next time, I think, heightens that, the concern about doing it that way. But I appreciate the commentary and look forward to the result of the process. Thank you.
I'm not going to pass myself twice, just real briefly. I know we're at time, but I was gonna ask, I know your external auditor can't do other certain work in terms of other services. Are there other qualified or presumably qualified firms that are somewhat excluded because they've done other work for us? Is that something we're cognizant of as we're choosing those other engagements in terms of we've disqualified a potential external auditor?
Regent Kenyanya, we do, and I'm going to say it's probably somewhat from a preference standpoint, we do tend to go to Deloitte for those optional audits, right? So, for example, the benefit audit or the benefit review that Judy mentioned, we're engaging them for. We naturally go to the external audit firm because we view them as the institution's audit firm. It's the firm that we've taken through an RFP process, we've interviewed, and the board has endorsed as our audit firm. We also don't have to renegotiate the contract with them. We don't have to spend institutional time in OGC, in the controller's office, and in other offices, acclimating those other firms to our internal control environment, the types of systems that we use. As I mentioned, we don't have to review their contract because they accepted our standard contract already. So a lot of that, what I call people time, we don't have to spend if we go to Deloitte for those other types of services, for those the optional types of services. We certainly can and have engaged with other firms over the course of the last few years. I know up at UMD for the radio audit, the KUMD audit, we used a regional firm up in Duluth for that. And we, as an institution, could do more of that if we chose to. It just, the payoff on the other side is it's more internal resource time, kind of bringing them up to speed for the environment of the university.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks, that was helpful clarification. Were you, Chief Auditor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Kenyon. I would just want to add to that, if you look at our information items today, one of the things that we bring forth to the committee is whenever there is an engagement with an auditing firm, because we recognize that it could create these sorts of conflicts. So that's part of the rationale for providing that information.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation and the discussion. Mr. Coomer, sorry for eating into a little bit of your time, but we do welcome you for our next agenda item, institutional compliance and conflict of interest reports. And whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair Kenyanya and members of the committee. In your board packet materials, you will find the annual institutional compliance report and the calendar year 2022 institutional conflict of interest report. The institutional conflict of interest report summarizes the conflict of interest program's activities related to institutional conflict of interest. And some highlights from that report. We received 100% of the required financial disclosures of university officials. That was 94 university officials filed their FDUOs as expected. The list of university officials required to file a FDUO can be found in the Administrative Policy, Institutional Conflict of Interest, in the appendix section, individuals required to file. The compliance program conducted its annual review of financial relationships with the university. They had business entities that fell within 2 or more of the following categories, including tech commercialization, gifts to the University of Minnesota Foundation, vendor contracts, and sponsored research. The conflict of interest program did not identify any relationships that compromise the integrity of the university research, teaching, outreach, or any other mission-related activity. The report states that the program did not identify any matters involving the following and list a number of criteria that would require Board of Regents involvement. However, this report was filed at the end of November, which to meet the report deadlines. There was a matter that came up in December where the conflict panel did meet. There's a plan to amend this report. This is regarding a potential conflict of interest matter involving the president, and it will be on this afternoon's Finance and Operations Committee agenda. So, and this report will be updated when that has resolved and there's an outcome. The institutional conflict panel, in addition to what I just mentioned, held 2 meetings this year to address the following. 3 phase 1 clinical trials involving university licensed intellectual property to treat cancer patients. A prospective clinical trial involving university licensed IP to treat patients with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and the establishment of individual conflict management plans for 2 college deans. Regarding the annual institutional compliance report, this report, this is the first time, first of all, that this is an annual report. This used to be a biannual report, but it's now it's been rolled up into a once-a-year report. The report addresses compliance risk review summaries, U-Report statistics, so that's our compliance hotline. And then what is new information that you have not seen before is an attempt to consolidate reports of reported misconduct in the institution. So on the topic of compliance risk reviews, the compliance risk review process, again, I know that we've talked about this at this committee before, but it's a process that's designed to be a collaborative, cross-functional, and cross-educational strategy for the oversight of significant compliance risk in the university. The process involves detailed research into the compliance risk topics and collaboration with the stakeholders, the topic owners for those subject matters, and where we analyze that compliance topic compared to the best practices in the compliance framework. In the upcoming year, we plan on performing risk reviews of clinical services, discrimination, hazardous material, and immigration, and there will probably be a few others added in 2023 as well. The reviews that were completed over the past year and that are included in this report are reviews of athletics, campus safety as it relates to drug and alcohol abuse prevention, controlled substances use and research, financial aid, and purchasing. In summary, for each of these areas, with the exception of the drug and alcohol abuse prevention program, our review did not identify any significant gaps in that compliance framework. On the topic of drug and alcohol abuse prevention, the review identified that the strength of the drug and alcohol abuse prevention programs appear to vary from campus to campus. A positive note, Duluth in particular appears to offer a model for organizing and implementing a comprehensive drug and alcohol abuse prevention program. So the Office of Institutional Compliance not only will monitor the progress of compliance improvements in the other areas, is really working to facilitate communication between the campuses with a focus on having that model program out there that Duluth that could be replicated elsewhere. On the topics of this annual report offers an overview of the report system, which I mentioned. Now, our U-Report system is a confidential web-based reporting service. It's provided by an independent company that provides similar services for other entities, including universities. The U-Report consultative team, which is an important component of this, is a group of individuals that review every report of noncompliance that is sent through the U-Report system to the compliance office. This team consists of the chief compliance officer, the chief auditor, the vice president for human resources, and a senior associate general counsel. So that group provides oversight of the entire U-Report process for every report filed. The U-Report is intended to be used to report violations of local, state, and federal laws, as well as violations of university policy. The statistics for this report from this past year are consistent with what we've seen in previous years. Perhaps with the exception of 2019 and a big part of 2020 and just not being typical years, but we would expect to receive between 200 and 250 reports a year. In this previous calendar year of 22, we received 212 reports. Of those reports, of those that were where the investigation was completed at the time of the filing of this report, 192 had been fully investigated. Substantiated the reporter's concerns, 21%, which is actually a bit higher than we've seen in the past. And this can be due to sometimes multiple people will identify a concern and report it. We count those individually because often they come in anonymous. And so there may be multiple hits on one topic. Typically, our substantiation rate is closer to 10%. Unsubstantiated, where we could not confirm the reporter's concerns, we were at 78.2%. Reports of misconduct may also be made directly to central offices that address concerns of misconduct. To provide a more comprehensive view, we attempted something new, and we attempted to consolidate the reports that were received by some of our more active central offices that take in reports. And to that, we found that there were a total of 932 reports, excluding reports from the U-Report system. Of those reports, reviews that were completed were 900, substantiated were 66. And again, I mentioned 10% being a pretty typical number for the U-Report system. And so I think on the larger scale, you can see that play out here. That would be a 7.3% substantiation rate, and unsubstantiated would be 834 or 93.7%. The work of pulling this information together proved to be a useful exercise. What we discovered, I believe, reinforces the idea that the university could really benefit from a centralized investigation management system. From area to area that conducts these types of investigations, they all had their own system for categorizing events, their own filing system for reports and et cetera. So it made an apples to apples comparison a bit challenging. There was a lot of work that had to be done with the data. And one of the limitations was when natural questions come up as we look into this data, right now, in order to drill down into it, drilling down one layer would probably take weeks of effort in collecting information and reanalyzing it. Whereas having an automated system, we would be able to do that, much easier if the system, if the users were to put that information into the system up front. So currently, the Office of Institutional Compliance is working with stakeholders, and we're looking at products and trying to identify what features the university would find most beneficial, and to gain an understanding of really what's out there in this vendor space. That concludes my prepared remarks, Chair Kenyanya.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the committee? Regent Swiggum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Boyd, I'm sure the wonderful comments towards the Duluth program as being a model are directly responsible to new Chancellor Macmillan, and his three-month tenure there is shown off already.
I'm sure, Regent Sviggum, thank you, yes.
I just like to kid my friend once in a while, as you would guess, and I use you to do it. Boyd, my question, you alluded to in your presentation, and I'd just like to expand a little bit about a potential conflict or a study of conflict or relationship with the president that we're going to discuss in this afternoon.
Yes.
Can you expand upon that just a little bit?
Thank you.
Regent Swiggum, I think we're going to visit this topic in the next committee meeting. And we'll save that discussion for, not the next one, but.
Is Boyd coming back in, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
You'll be available, Mr. Coomer, you'll be available during that discussion?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, all right. Do you have another question?
No.
Okay, Vice Chair Rosha.
Thank you, Chair Kenyanya. I noticed, like on this report, in the U reports by category, it talks, there's substantiated and unsubstantiated. We have a graph of the different categories of the reports.
Yes.
But it doesn't, we don't have a graph of where the substantiated cases are. So, for instance, this says 42 were substantiated out of 212 U reports in that during the period, but that could be 41 health and safety and 1 financial. I'd be interested to know what categories, which, it'd be nice to have 2 graphs. One is where do the claims come, and then the second one, which ones were substantiated by category. I think that'd be helpful for the board to know going forward, so.
Chair Kenyanya, Regent Rosha, thank you for the question. We'll keep that in mind and look at options for developing that information into future reports.
And Mr. Chair, and with the same thing then in the next category of the formally managed reports, where it talks about I'm sorry, not that one, it's the next category down, but whenever there's the case of claims, reports made and then substantiated, I think that'd be helpful for us to kind of see where the issues are. Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you.
And, I mean, I really like that we're exploring that centralized, solution for this, because my understanding is you kind of pulled a lot of this, data together to present it. So I think that's a really good thing we're looking at. I think it'll be helpful. My question was around, I think we said 90% are usually unsubstantiated, 10% substantiated. When we think of those numbers, I won't ask you to guess, but it's either that 90% of reports were untrue, or that we're just not able to, go out and find the supporting evidence, and that's obviously unfortunate. So what, how do we go about finding supporting evidence, and how can we improve that? Because, I don't think 90% of people are untruthful, but I also can appreciate how hard that task is to then go and follow that up. So how can we kind of try to change that number a little bit?
Chair Kenyanya, members of the committee, that is a fantastic question. And there's lots of layers actually to the answer. And this is again where having a more robust system for consolidating this information would be useful. So in many cases, the things that are unsubstantiated are actually handled informally. So there's not an investigation where you would substantiate a claim, but we find that it's a dialogue issue between, for instance, two colleagues, and which may manifest itself in a report as a discrimination claim, but it's really it's a teaching moment. And so it gets moved into a different category where it's not investigated again, where we would substantiate it, but the parties have agreed to an informal resolution. So a lot of those are part of this. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of perceived, there's the potential for perceived misconduct because people don't have all of the information. So they see an activity, they don't fully understand what's happening, so they're doing a good job in reporting because we would want to know about that. But there hasn't been a violation. And with that, what we try to do, and we encourage our stakeholders to do as well, is look at the scenario and ask yourself, could you have provided more information in some way? Could you have made things more transparent, better office communication? So a lot of things fall into that area as well. Certainly 90% of the reports, it's not that the reporter is being untruthful. It's either handled informally to a good resolution for everyone, or again, it's a matter of perception.
To your point about teaching and education, because the reports are anonymous, or I don't know if they all are. I think they can be anonymous. We can't then follow up with a lot of those people and provide that teaching, which could just result in more reports. Is that correct?
Well, again, there's a caveat to that as well. So the system that we have allows for anonymous reporters to receive feedback.
Got it.
So when a reporter goes to the system, they create their own unique user ID and password. We have no access to it because it's a third party, and we can communicate that way.
The system knows who it is and can facilitate the communication. Got it. Those clarifications were both very helpful. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We will lastly turn to our Chief Auditor for information items. Chief Auditor Galsworth.
Yes, thank you, Chair Kenyanya. Excuse me, as mentioned earlier, there's one information item at the end of your document materials on page 129. It is related to work that Clifton and Larson Allen did at the university's Community Healthcare Center, COOC. This was looking at the master fee schedule and confirming that those are in alignment with market rates. This was not perceived to create any conflicts of interest or issues in the future for potential bidding, et cetera, as we were just discussing.
Any questions on this item? All right. Seeing none, thank you everyone for your time and discussion. We will reconvene at 9:15 for the next committee meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.